Hello, PAX Online. So glad you could join us for Dungeons and Dog Tags. This panel is brought to you by Game to Grow. My name is Adam Davis, the founder and executive director of Game to Grow. Game to Grow is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We're based in the greater Seattle area. What we're most well known for is the use of Dungeons and Dragons to help our participants have insight, growth, and change. And our panelists here are all people who have used Dungeons and Dragons in therapeutic work with veterans. So I'm very excited to be sharing this panel with everyone out there. A few important debriefs before we get started. This panel is not a training, even though we're going to talk a lot about how Dungeons and Dragons can be used to help people, especially veterans. I want to encourage you, if you are someone who maybe has veterans in your gaming group, don't do therapy on them unless you are a therapist. Also, please know that if stories do come up, which I assume and hope they will, that the panelists are changing the demographic information, won't be disclosing anything to violate any of their confidentiality. So let's get our panel started with some introductions. Let's go down the panel and hear who are you and what brings you to this panel.
I am Dr. Allison Battles. I am a psychology postdoctoral fellow at the Minneapolis VA and have been running a D&D group there for the past year. And I'm keeping the group going and keeping it alive into the upcoming year.
I'm Dr. Jared Kilmer. I am a licensed psychologist and the director of counseling services at Game to Grow. I've had the opportunity to run therapeutic tabletop games in multiple settings and with multiple populations. And of particular relevance to this panel, I've had the opportunity to start several programs in the Waco VA and the Dallas VA.
My name is Dr. Elizabeth Kilmer. I am also a clinical psychologist, and I am the Director of Education and Training with Game to Grow. Like everybody else in this panel, I've had experience running groups with veterans. I ran groups at the Dallas VA. I also started groups in a couple of different clinics at the American Lake VA, including the mental health clinic as well as primary care. And those groups are still running.
Fantastic. So first question for the panelists is, how long have you been playing Dungeons & Dragons? How long did it take before you were using Dungeons & Dragons in therapeutic work with veterans? And if you can add to that, what is something that caused that spark, that helped you realize the power and the impact of this game for this population?
So I've been playing Dungeons... Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, as we're jumping into this, because I like my job and I want to keep it. The views expressed in this presentation are those of us, the authors, and don't necessarily reflect the position or policy of the Department of the Veterans Affairs or the U.S. government. So we're just talking from our own perspectives and our own experiences.
Absolutely, yes. We're not speaking on behalf of the government or the VA.
Yes.
So I have been playing Dungeons & Dragons for a little over 5 years now. I got into it in graduate school, and shortly after that, Jared went to a panel at PAX South done by Adam, who is our moderator today, talking about the use of Dungeons and Dragons in therapeutic social skills groups with kids. And we were like, oh, this is great. This is really consistent with a lot of what we're learning, especially training in interpersonal process group therapy, as well as cognitive behavioral therapies like ACT and CBT. And so we had the opportunity to start programs in various settings. So the first program that I ran was in a children's advocacy center. And then shortly after that, I started running groups at the Dallas VA. I continued a group that Jared had started in outpatient substance use.
And I guess just to flesh out that origin story a little bit, we both started playing tabletop role-playing games when 5th edition came out. It was that reset was a very helpful time to jump in and learn a whole new system, was like everyone else was, even if they had been playing for years. So it felt a lot more approachable. And it happened at just the most serendipitous time where we were in graduate school and reflecting on ourselves and are learning our own clinical orientation and how can we help others, and the anecdotal experiences we had playing in our own games and noticing the insight we were gaining into ourselves. It seemed like a natural extension to bring that into a therapeutic space. At that same time, when I was having my training occurring in the VA, there was a need to fill where there were many veterans in the system who were either no longer, they were not interested in services anymore, they were burnt out from going to multiple groups that didn't work for them, or groups never really felt very approachable, or the traditional group setting was a bit more overt, and what's the word that I want?
I think people just felt frustrated. Like they felt kind of tired or burned out. It's oftentimes when people come to these groups, they felt like they've tried therapy before, but it hasn't worked for them. Maybe they've had a bad fit with a therapist. Maybe it wasn't a good time. Maybe the type of therapy or the engagement it was asking for was inconsistent with what the veteran was able to provide at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So you sort of saw Dungeons and Dragons as a solution to that problem. What about you, Allison?
I feel like my origin story is very akin to both Elizabeth and Jared. So I got started playing D&D, oh God, how long ago? Anyways, probably about like 10 years ago. It was kind of around the time of 5th edition. I had some friends who were playing, and my now husband was kind of like, let's give this a go. And I was like, all right, I like role playing, I like theater, so why not? And absolutely fell in love with it. And so for me, it was a lot more of just enjoying the play, enjoying being with my friends, and was able to continue that through grad school. And D&D was 100% a magical escape for me during grad school, whenever everything just felt so overwhelming and awful. And so it was actually a moment when I was working at a naval hospital that was near my graduate program, that I was working with about a active duty member who played a lot of D&D, and he was saying how important it was for him, like whenever they would go underway or whenever they would go out on deployments, of being able to play that together while they were on the ship, because it was one of those like, well, what else are we going to do? And how much of a wonderful outlet that was for active duty service members. And so for me, even with that, like we were able to kind of bring in like character creation and character development as like elements of like individual therapy. But the thought of really doing like D&D group as a therapy kind of came to me last summer. One of my friends went off to her internship, and they had a D&D group that was for individuals, or actually college students, who were on the autism spectrum. And so that really got me thinking of like, wow, okay, this can be something that is therapeutic. And I've seen a lot of personal growth, a lot of confidence building in myself, seen a lot of changes just across my friends through playing. And it was a lot of that really got me thinking of, this could be something. And I proposed it to my training program as a just project during my internship year, being like, they're never going to accept this. How am I ever going to get them to believe in this? And immediately my training director was like, yes, let's do that. And I was like, oh, okay, this is excellent. And was allowed me to just kind of roll on with this dream and kind of creating it. And it has turned into something really fantastic. I am now known as like, I was known as the geek intern, and now I'm known as like the geek postdoc, and that is like my notoriety at the hospital. And I'm down with that. I'm fine with that.
That's awesome. I think that like all three of us started programs while kind of in training positions, which I think is actually can be a really great place to be. If you have a good supervisor and you can show them that you are competent and you do know what you're talking about, we can talk, that's a whole other talk about how to kind of sell this to people. But when you're a trainee, you often have a little bit more space for some of these projects that might not otherwise just have the space or the time to get them started. And I will say that like several of the programs that we started, even though we aren't there anymore, they have continued on. So we've done trainings for staff at at 3 different VA systems to talk about kind of the benefits and helping getting groups started. And so having that kind of foot in the door of, hey, I'm a trainee, this is a year-long project, so if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. You're not losing out on anything, was, I think, really beneficial for us to get the foot in the door. And at this point, at least 3 or 4 VA systems have seen some really positive effects with their veterans and have continued these programs, have cared enough to train other staff members to continue these programs after we've left.
Well, that's a great opportunity for us to sort of illuminate that for the audience. So a lot of us have, maybe there are some veterans watching, maybe there's people who have veterans that they care about, who, they have some awareness of the context of the individuals you're working with. But I would love for the 3 of you to help the audience who may not be veterans themselves or have veterans that they care about, help help us understand what sort of context you're working on. Maybe that's diagnoses, maybe those are challenges you're working on, but help us understand that.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Before we get into that, I just want to acknowledge that when we are talking about an entire population, and in this case it is veterans, nothing that we say is going to be a universal truth. It may be like trends or averages, but more than likely it has been our personal experience.
So we're going to be talking in generalities. We'll talk about some of the experience we've had. And it's something that it's also important to think about how this is going to vary not only by individual, but also by kind of region and clinic. So within like a VA medical hospital, which is where we started most of these groups, those hospitals will have different clinics. So there'll be a general mental health clinic. There'll be a specialty PTSD clinic. There'll be substance use treatment clinics. There'll be severe mental illness clinics. There will be kind of primary care. So multiple different clinics.
And so for me and my group, we actually, rather than kind of putting it in one specific clinic, allowed it to be more of a hospital-wide group. So any veteran from any one of the clinics could be referred. So I had a lot of folks coming to me from the trauma clinic that we have, a lot of folks from our serious mental illness clinic. We have what we call kind of a general mood clinic, and it had a lot of folks there. And ultimately, I think for me and the group that I created, it was a lot of more focus on if you're experiencing social anxiety, if you're finding yourself avoiding things within your life, if you're struggling with kind of various mood concerns, then the group would be beneficial for you. So I had a wide range of mental health diagnoses from PTSD and social anxiety to various forms of psychosis. And so for me and my groups, it was a lot of focus of like the diagnoses wasn't per se the biggest emphasis, but it was more if your quality of life is something that you're feeling isn't great, if you're feeling like you're struggling to function in your everyday life, then this could be a group that can really help to activate and get you kind of in a like better place in life where you're feeling that you can take on the challenges that you're facing right now.
Absolutely. I think some of the kind of common themes or goals that we'll see in our groups are things like frustration tolerance, communication skills, anger management, trust. Trust is a really big one. And then just kind of resetting. So the military, just like other large organizations, but I would say especially the military, there's a specific way that you interact with other people. There's a specific way that you understand the role that each person plays, the things that you can trust people to do and not do. And so if you are in that system, especially if you're in that system in a high risk area, right? So you are deployed to a combat zone, you're going to learn those lessons about how you communicate, how you interact with other people really, really well. It can be then very hard to transition from this military way of interacting to the civilian side, especially if that's exacerbated by any mental health concerns like anxiety, depression, or PTSD. It can be really hard to kind of recalibrate, how do I interact with people? People aren't acting the way that I expect them to. They're not following the rules the way that I want. That can be a huge challenge on top of any other issues that people are facing. And so this group can be a great way to readjust and kind of reestablish what communication and what trust can look like for you.
Go on ahead.
Oh, I was just going to add, it's an excellent place to like learn and then practice new skills that maybe you didn't have the opportunity to outside of these groups.
And I love that you hit on trust, because I think that is a huge thing that can really come up, particularly within the veteran population, is whenever that trust, you kind of learn different ways of interacting or have that trust violated, how do you then kind of adjust yourself back? And one of the group members that I had in my most recent group, he, over the course of time, started to become more comfortable. And actually, when we were doing a post-game processing, shared a little bit about kind of his difficulties with trust, some of the ways that he was really kind of struggling to allow himself to come out, to be vulnerable with group members and people in his everyday life. And so that like opened the door for group members to really start to talk about, oh, this is what I'm struggling with. I feel you on what you're experiencing. And they were able to give one another like in the moment feedback of how they were, experiencing one another, how they were relating to one another. And it led to like this beautiful bonding moment between all of them, of just a moment where they could be truly vulnerable and authentic. And it was accepted by everybody in the group. And it was the coolest. It was really cool to see that. And I think that's one of the really special things about these groups is those opportunities to be authentic, to be genuine, but also to work on trust.
Mm-hmm. We often will talk about this in the framework of like traditional process groups. So the idea of with the traditional process group, you're going to get together with the same group of people over a series of weeks, and you're going to sit around and you're going to talk about your lives. You're going to talk about your feelings, and those groups can be incredibly beneficial. They also have a pretty high barrier to entry in terms of like I have to be willing and able to sit down with a bunch of strangers and talk about my feelings. And for a lot of people, that is a hard pass. And so groups like this that include these games allow for a couple of different things, right? They allow for a lower barrier to entry because if I want to participate in the group, I can just play the game. I don't have to talk about my feelings. I don't have to talk about my life, but I can still participate. I can participate at the level that feels comfortable to me without being on the edges of the group and not truly engaging. The other piece is you get this chance to kind of build experience. So I am not a veteran. I'm not a combat veteran, but I have had veterans tell me that like engaging in these kinds of groups is the closest they've been to being in a unit or the closest they've been to kind of being in combat situations. Obviously, since they left the military. Obviously, there are major differences between sitting around a computer or sitting around a table. But what they really hit on is that idea of like, I knew that everybody in that group had my back. I was able to also kind of test that over time. I was able to see how they played out different scenarios. I was able to really feel like I had an understanding of how they would act in real life through this game. And so that allows for this build of trust in a way that we might not see as quickly or even at all in a group where we're mostly just kind of talking without that like vector for action.
I'm almost a little bit concerned. I'm trying to imagine this from an outside perspective, like a viewer, and I worry that we haven't actually described what happens in our groups.
Makes sense.
Next question, actually, Jared.
Framing.
The group, the audience might understand what Dungeons and Dragons is, what it looks like as they play it in their game store or as they play it with their friends, wherever they play it. How does this group structure look different than that? Look the same as that? Help us understand that.
So the part that might look the same is, at least for Elizabeth and I's groups, we've always carved out a 2-hour time block for our participants to come in and engage as a group. And of those 2 hours, the first 90 minutes roughly is the gameplay. That seems to be like a pretty good nugget of time that you can get deep enough into the game, but always end on a note where you're like, I would have liked more, because it's D&D, and if you've ever played it, you can do it for quite a while sometimes. But what our groups are doing and what they do simulate of other group therapies is the last 30 minutes of that 2-hour block is a dedicated time to process the experiences that occurred during the gameplay. We may be just making mental notes and observing tendencies in ourselves or in our characters or how we are relating to each other, just kind of covertly throughout the game. But it's that moment where we get to step back and process and discuss. And that's where a lot of the insight gets really solidified and where some of the trust really grows from.
Absolutely.
Yeah, my group has a very similar time frame of the 90 minutes of gameplay, 30 minutes of post-game processing. And within the post-game processing, which I think is like where like the golden therapeutic moments can sometimes happen, there's both like process elements of, discussing what it's like to be that character, discussing what that in-game was like. But we also bring in a bit of skills building. So we pull from different evidence-based modalities that maybe would potentially be a skill that is helpful. So a problem-solving skill or discussing like effective communication skills. So we try and bring in things that are additionally evidence-based while also ensuring that there are plenty of moments to be able to have those kind of process elements within the game. And I think the post-game process allows for a lot of flexibility in how you are able to weave in a lot of evidence-based therapy component.
So I'm going to agree with you that the post-game process definitely has some of those golden therapeutic moments, but it's also not the only place that those golden therapeutic moments happen. I think that it can be, for people who don't understand the modality as much, like if you're explaining to administrator, or you're explaining to clients, they might say like, oh, so like the point is you play the game so that you can then be better at processing. And absolutely the gameplay totally helps with the process. But the gameplay is also a really important place for learning and insight and growth itself. There are clients I've seen where I think most of their growth happened in the gameplay and very little of it happened in the processing. And I know that when we're talking about kind of treatment planning and our goal setting for the game, I'm sure we all do this, right? We're having an idea of like, okay, are we working on impulsivity? Are we working on frustration tolerance? Like, what are the kinds of things that I'm doing? And I'm going to pull in techniques from CBT. I'm going to pull in techniques from ACT. I'm going to pull in techniques from CPT, from these evidence-based psychotherapies, and then put those into the game. For example, I might have an NPC so a non-player character, a player that I am playing, that is having a really, really hard time, is just really frustrated, is really angry with everyone, and my players need to be able to get through this person to get to whatever is behind them, right? This is a really pissed off guard, and they really, really need to get to that storage room. Now they have a bunch of different options. They can just try and fight the guard, or they can try and talk their way past the guard. They can try and dismiss the guard. But in these options, I might give them these kind of steps and these skills around being able to talk to the guard about like, why is he so angry and frustrated? Like, what is happening in his body? What is the dysregulation that's happening for him? And that's a way that my players can literally teach someone else the skill or the techniques that they've been working on. And sometimes those techniques we explicitly talked about like how to breathe. And sometimes those techniques are more implicitly taught throughout the game, where they're able to practice and teach that skill. And we know that in terms of learning, if we're trying to really cement new learning, having you teach whatever you're trying to learn to someone else is a great way to really get it in your brain.
So it sounds like as you are taking your treatment goals and letting that influence the outcomes you want for your participants, a lot of that happens in the sort of post-game debrief. How do you, as the game master, keeping in mind that this is not a training, how do you let the treatment goals inform what happens in the story? And can you give us an example of a time you made a plan for an in-game scenario to sort of be targeted to that treatment goal?
I can talk about one. So I feel like I keep telling stories. So feel free to jump in if other people have opinions. But a lot of it has to do around like consequences in the game. So things like what are going to be the consequences, or what are going to be the opportunities, and not in terms of like, oh, you didn't do what I wanted, so like now you get penalized 5 gold or whatever. But for example, if my group is getting really stuck, like they're always engaging in combat, or they're always engaging in trying to like intimidate whoever they're talking to, right? I don't have a problem with them engaging in combat. I don't have a problem with them intimidating. But if that's the only strategy they're using, then that's telling me that they're getting stuck in these kind of rigid thinking patterns. And typically my groups are looking to improve kind of that cognitive flexibility. So I might give them puzzles or encounters where they're not able to just push past it, right? For example, if they're really combat heavy, they might have a ghost in the next encounter, and that ghost is going to be pretty invincible to all attacks. Now I know that typically ghosts are vulnerable to magical attacks, but I'm the GM and I can make whatever rules I want, so my ghost can be totally invincible if I want, because it's consistent with my goals for that group. So that just pushes them to make other options.
For me, what comes to mind is in one of my groups, one of the group members had more of a goal of like acknowledge that he struggled with impulsivity, and that this really impacted his ability to like form and like maintain relationships. And this was 100% coming out in his character. It's like, you have the cliche murder hobo, he was our impulse hobo. And just like was 100%, the group wanted to do one thing, nope, he wanted to do another thing, and like would actually separate from the group and go do that. He would, an idea would strike him and he would like sneak away from the group and go do other things. And this really impacted group cohesion, because the group wasn't in on anything that he was doing. So it kind of had to do like a bit of structuring, in the sense of like, he wanted to like sneak into one of the king's advisors' offices and like steal something from them. And so it was one of those like he was having to like sneak through a castle in order to get there. And so along the way, there were different like challenges for him of like, you know, coming into contact with a guard. He opens up the door to the office and the advisor is sitting there and it's like, yo, bro, what the hell are you doing here? And so those types of moments where he was kind of having to see that there are consequences to his actions and that if you wanted to do this, potentially getting the party in on it could have led to like this more orchestrated thing to be able to, you know, subterfuge or to distract the advisor to be able to get it and get this. Because once he explained his ideas to the party was like, oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You have suspicions about this guy going into his office and trying to kind of do some investigation makes sense. And so, him encountering consequences as like the lone wolf to be able to take on these challenges didn't prove fruitful. But having him kind of in that moment, like pause and then kind of tell the group what he was thinking, led to them being able to do some really neat things together. So I think it's a lot of like taking those group goals that, you know, come up, and you know, I do pre-group interviews to get a sense of what they're wanting to work on. But a lot of times folks don't know as they're entering into the group, you know, explicitly what they're wanting to work on, but you see that start to come out organically, at least within the first couple groups. And so kind of shaping more of the encounters, like Elizabeth was saying, of, you know, if they are more combat heavy, throw a puzzle at them. I'm actually getting her help on designing some new puzzles for my next group this upcoming year.
I'm really excited about it. Thank you for giving a consequences example, because I was like, I use environmental consequences, and then I didn't actually give an example of that. I have another short example. Oftentimes when players will start in groups, especially if they have a really hard time trusting or they're just feeling really burnt out or disengaged for any reason, there can be this sense of like, I don't need to be here. I'm not going to make a difference. My presence here doesn't matter. And so when players kind of show up and they're acting that way, one of the things that I will do is I will try and create scenarios that will highlight the strengths of those players, or the strengths of their characters, especially if I don't know the player very well. And that can be something that's really powerful and really meaningful. It can also be really beneficial, even if the player doesn't show up to session. So I had an experience where a player was kind of in and out, disengaged, and had made some comments around like, well, it doesn't matter. Like, it's not like I'm helpful anyway. I don't know what I'm doing. All of this is kind of like, it doesn't matter. And then, so I had some ideas about this was a cleric, and I was like, okay, I have some ideas about like these puzzles that could be solved really, really well with some of his spells. Maybe they'll use it, maybe they won't, but like there's this setup here. Well, then that player didn't show up for session. And I could have said, oh man, I need to rework this. But I didn't. I let my players really struggle. They made it through, but they really struggled because the person they had in their party that would have made this a cakewalk wasn't there. So then when the player came back the next week, the whole group was saying like, man, we really missed you. It would have been like, we really struggled without you. We really needed you. You were a really valuable part of this group. And so having that kind of genuine feedback was really, really important, especially with veteran populations where we often see a high dropout rate across treatment services. Having a group where it actually matters if you show up every week, you're not just another butt in the seat, can be really important and can help kind of reinstill that sense of worth and like teamwork.
And we can also see that get leverage in the opposite direction, where like, you know, over time when these groups get really formed and after the experiences Elizabeth and Allison have described, like absenteeism tends to go down pretty significantly, but it still happens sometimes for all number of reasons, especially in a hospital setting where you may have multiple appointments and just pull you elsewhere. But I have had situations where a group of 5 veterans became a group of 2 veterans just because happenstance. We didn't have as much people. And of the 2 that were left, they were both individuals that very much wanted to work on like gaining self-confidence and advocacy and leadership skills. And in a typical game, the spotlight would bounce between the 5 of them, such where they were more comfortable taking kind of a back seat and fading into the background, but going along. And when we were left with two, it became the spotlight that just switched between the two of them. And one of those veterans in particular decided, well, I'm going to need to take lead today. My voice is going to matter so much more just because it must. And in the processing at the end of that session, they were both able to say, I did not realize, the two of us could communicate so well, that we could get as far as we did without the others. We missed them. It would have been better if they were around. But this was an excellent opportunity for me to realize, I can make tough calls, and I could stand as a leader more than I realized I could. In subsequent weeks, when everybody returned, they kind of learned of this experience. And in a very established group, a lot of the groups I've had the opportunity to run, it is a therapy group. And so they are much more explicit about what their diagnoses are and what their treatment goals are and what they are hoping to accomplish by being present there. And so it was normal in these groups to say, I am trying to work on leadership, or I am trying to work on advocacy. I do have an issue with impulsivity, and I'd love it if you called me out on it when I exhibit some of those symptoms there. And so having recounted that story, the rest of the group was able to applaud this person for taking on that leadership role. And they asked this person to be in that position more frequently in the future. After a while, their confidence grew significantly, and they started saying, I have been applying for more jobs, jobs that will put me in a more leadership position and let me advance in life. And within a few months, they had that job.
That's a great
Excellent.
example of growth. That's fantastic. So it sounds like taking treatment goals and informing planning is a big part of it. It also sounds like the post game debrief is really important. And it also sounds like there is a lot of moments that sort of happen organically that you then jump on and respond to in a proactive way.
Oh, 100%.
I would love to hear more of those moments when you were surprised when the sort of magic, the inherent magic of collaborative role playing prompts insight, growth, and change. That's obviously the entire mission of Game to Grow, and I would love to hear more for the people out there about the inherent power of this game to prompt these opportunities for this growth.
Absolutely. I can tell it kind of it's a little sad in the middle, but it's fine. So I was playing a game, and most of my players were new. This was the first or second session. So all of my groups are closed groups, but for these particular groups, I had rolling admission, which meant when there was a spot open, someone new could come in. Everybody knew about it. It wasn't a surprise. And for this particular group, everybody was going after some kids that had been kidnapped. If you're ever looking for a starting position that is going to get your veterans on board, veterans are all people and they have different experiences, but I've had 100% success rate with there have been children kidnapped. What would you like to do? Everyone says, go after the kids. This particular group, they hadn't really formed into a group yet. There was one player who said, I don't trust them. I'm not walking within 100 yards of them. Absolutely not. Yes, I want to save the kids, but I'm going to do that on my own, and they can save the kids, and I'm not getting near them because I don't trust anybody. And they're walking down this road, and they're walking down the into the woods, and they hear a rustling in the bushes. And all of a sudden, something pops out. And before I have the chance to explain that what has popped out is a tiny, adorable baby owlbear. The person in the front of the party says, I stab it with my knife. Now, I'm the DM, right? I get to slow down and speed up time. So I could have made the choice to say, let me explain this first before I tell you what's going on. But this is a group where they had said, I'm impulsive and I get really angry and I go from 0 to 100 and I have trouble trusting. And so I said, all right, we're going to let this play out. And so they rolled, and the AC of a baby owlbear is very low. And they hit this baby owlbear. And I described that they have stabbed this baby owlbear. And everybody at the table was very reasonably pretty upset about it. And the person who said, oh, I'm going to be 100 yards back said, no, that wouldn't have happened because I would have stopped them. And we had this conversation about how the heck are you, this was a split-second decision. How are you going to stop them from 100 yards back? And so we had a couple things that were going on in this moment that I, in no way, shape, or form, planned. Did not plan for them to attack baby owlbears. Where this player at the front was able to say, man, I don't stab people in my everyday life, but I do respond that quickly. I respond as if there is a threat before I even know whether or not there is one. And that's really problematic. It has gotten me in trouble at work. It has gotten me in trouble at home. It makes people think that I'm angry all the time, and I'm not angry all the time, but I react really strongly. It also made the person in the back have to consider, what are the costs of being separate from a group and choosing not to trust so much in this instance that they weren't even willing to walk within 100 yards of this other group. That there's a trade-off, right? If you stand back, you can potentially keep yourself safe, but you have less control over what is happening in the group, over what is happening with the other people. And so that was a moment that, again, was not planned, but allowed for a whole lot of discussion. They eventually found another baby owlbear, which they named Roadkill, and became their most valuable and treasured party member that got the prime choice of all of the dead things, and was cared for. Even when these group members all graduated from this group, Roadkill continued on to all of the new group members for over a year.
Oh, so, I love that.
Yeah. It was a good time.
I think that just those moments and the opportunities as a GM to be able to kind of decide how you're going to make things go. For me, one that came up is one of my group members really struggled with feeling like he had agency or a voice or the confidence to vocalize things. And so they had been sent by the king to go infiltrate a group of rebels, and were riding out in one of the royal carts and had these badges on, and came to a village that had been burnt down. And so they were kind of trying to figure out what to do next. And that group member who had really struggled to kind of voice things, I saw him kind of because all of my groups, thank you, COVID, have been virtual. And so for him, it was moments of I was seeing kind of nonverbals in the video of him wanting to speak up. And so as the GM, I kind of was oh, hold on, guys, I want to table talk for a moment. What are you thinking? And he was able to kind of share this idea of what if we burn the cart and pay this villager to say that we have taken out these guards and we're on the rebel side and this, that, and the other. And the group was that is genius. Let's do this. So they burn the cart, they pay this villager, and they're well, how do we know he's going to do that? And then others start to come up. And so I just very theatrically played this villager of oh my gosh, these guys just burnt down this cart. They took out some guards. What is happening? And so they were able to get a really solid in with this rebel group because they went in an entirely different direction of all right, well, we're going to walk up and try and find them and hopefully get in. And he got such wonderful praise from the group about it being just a really creative way to tackle this problem. And I think that's one of the great things about the moment in the game, where people are able to vocalize something different. The spotlight is able to be shared on group members that maybe take a backseat, that can lead to some just really phenomenal growth and learning moments.
Jared, do you have a story for me? Or I can think of a story you've told me a bunch of times that I would love for you to share. And that is, Elizabeth shared about her start with kids being kidnapped, and you have a story about a traditional tavern start.
Okay.
Where the players all had that moment of insight right away.
This is the very first 5 minutes that I ever ran a therapeutic tabletop game. So I was working at the time as a psychology intern in the PTSD residential rehabilitation program at the Waco VA. So it is inpatient for multiple weeks. I think it was 8 weeks of full time from 9 to 5 treatment. And the very first day we had a whole new round, a new cohort. We had 2 hours blocked out for our therapeutic RPG group, and I started it very classically. I drew out a tavern and all the tables and bars and etc. I populated it with different NPCs. I explained what was happening, and then I asked each veteran to go around the table and just place your mini somewhere in the tavern and describe what you're up to. And one by one, everybody did that until the very final person grabbed his mini, put him in the corner, and said, "I'm not really doing anything. I'm just hanging out and surveying the room with my back to the wall." And then there was a pause for about 5 seconds, and then he said, and also, I think everybody else did that exact same thing. And as we're looking at the map, nobody's in the center. Everyone has their back to the wall, acting in the exact same way. And the insight of the veteran happened instantly and organically, with everyone else kind of nodding along, like, oh, crap, this is happening. And that is what we do in our daily life. And it's kind of remarkable how quickly it mimicked real world behavior within minutes.
And you used that word organically. Obviously, a lot of this is a profound opportunity for them to very experientially have this opportunity for growth. I'm curious if you've had any sort of teachable moments, maybe challenging moments where things didn't go as well as you wanted to, maybe moments that you learned from or that your players learned from that were challenging.
A story that comes to my mind, I don't even remember the context anymore, and I will argue that it doesn't matter. But the party was fighting a group of giant rats. They've gotten into fights before. They've succeeded. They move forward. Here we are now. We were just taking our pass through the initiative, and I had one veteran say, all right, it's my turn. I go up. I'm going to drop my axe on the head of this giant rat. I'm going to kill it. It's going to be great. I'm the best. My paladin's the best. And they rolled like a 2. And I got to describe how their blade missed its mark, and it did not connect. It didn't have the outcome that they were hoping for. And the person looked disappointed. But as the minutes passed, like it seemed like that disappointment really started to like dig its claws in to this individual, and they started getting like lower in their chair and then putting their head down, and eventually like they weren't really participating anymore, until the group had to like pause and say like, hey, are you doing all right? And then they shared like how frustrated they are. I'm supposed to be this strong paladin. Everyone is counting on me. I've done well in the past. It was just a simple thing. All I had to do was swing my axe. I can't even do that right. I don't know what good I am to this group. And it was a feeling that was intense enough that they needed 5 minutes. They had to step out of the room, just get some space, take some time to themselves, breathe, and come back. They came back to like finish up the gameplay session, and then we were able to process what had happened. And they said, in everyday life, I'm realizing that I am afraid of failure. It means something about me, and that's I don't think that that's actually true, but that was a belief that they held at that moment. And I don't like taking risks wherein I could succeed or fail, because I'm probably going to fail. And I can't tolerate that right now. To which, because this was a group setting, she immediately had the opportunity to have people around them say, hey, I've noticed you succeed over and over again, so I do think that this might have been partially by chance that you did not succeed this time. I also have observed a lot of your other behaviors in play today and in the past where like something that you tried didn't work out, but it inspired everyone else to take a similar approach, and it did work out. Like your ideas were great, and sometimes our dice doesn't favor us. And through that discussion, the veteran was eventually able to get to this idea of every time I take a risk, there's a chance that it will succeed and there's a chance that it will fail, but it is the thing between me and success and feeling good and like gaining some of this confidence. And I also have a group of people around me to hold me up if things don't go my way. And it became like a very powerful reframe for like the entirety of the rest of the semester of risk equals reward. And if we can create an environment where we feel comfortable and safe taking risks, we can flourish in a lot of ways that we weren't allowing ourselves to otherwise.
Jared, what I also love about that story is how much the group is learning from each other. That sounds like there's so much, not just personal insight that happens in the relational space with the game master, but also a lot of the relationships that are happening and the sort of peer modeling and peer observations that are happening there too. I know, Allison, you had a story sort of around this. We were talking earlier around a challenging moment.
Mm-hmm. and so, for the challenging moment, this was, the kind of impulsive character, one of my group members was playing, and being able to kind of have, and interestingly, it led to like a conflict moment where the group was actually arguing with one another about what to do, how they were responding to this, and they all kind of like sat back and were just kind of like noticing themselves arguing and noticing kind of patterns that came up in their own lives. And so being able to kind of see that this was a really challenging moment that led to conflict, but then they were able to kind of have an additional conversation about what it was like to argue and to find themselves becoming angry, and how can they potentially go about this in a way that they feel is more helpful. Because in their other lives, they never, in their kind of normal everyday lives, you don't really get the opportunity to get feedback, direct, in the moment feedback from another person who you're interacting with. And so that kind of like active, organic, kind of relational feedback was really powerful for them, even with a conflict moment, even with, a group member doing something that others were really not agreeing with. And that was actually one of the most interesting pieces of feedback. And it was one of those like, oh, this is like, the most backhanded compliment I've ever received. Was like one of my group members was like, you and my co-facilitator, it's like, y'all created a great world, but y'all were not the biggest part of like what I found helpful. It was actually being able to like interact with other group members. And it was one of those like, yes, that is awesome.
That's
Created a
great
framework,
feedback.
and you go forward. You take this game and you make it your own. And so it's one of those like, oh, that's awesome. But also, am I doing okay? And so that's my own like, oh, am I okay? But yeah, that's just normal anxieties, which we all experience.
Did they tell you that you weren't helpful, or that just that you weren't the most helpful? Because it's
Weren't
possible
the
there
most
were
helpful.
multiple helpful things in that group.
Yes.
Well,
Gotta reframe even for myself.
those social connections in these groups are so important. It was one of the big impetuses for us. Did I conjugate that right? To start these up. Mental health diagnoses come with a host of symptoms that actually kind of you'll see kind of repeated between diagnoses. But one thing that comes up a lot is social withdrawal and isolation, and like this disconnect from other people, which over time leads to an atrophy for like self-advocacy and social skills and ability to communicate effectively the way you would want. Is watching some of my group participants like move through this group, I would get feedback from their therapist saying, hey, all of a sudden this person is bringing up content or wanting to process something that has been historically difficult that they had refused in the past. Or this particular veteran that I'm thinking of was very socially isolated, very socially awkward, wasn't comfortable reaching out to others. And to the point where they brought up to me, I would like to ask some of my cohort like out for coffee after group sometime, like so we could connect better. And I encouraged that, but it took about 5 weeks before their own confidence built up. And then they decided like, no, I'm going to do this. I feel safe. I trust them. And 80% of the group said yes and went out for coffee with them, which became a regular occurrence, like every other group. It then also became a thing where they started to desire greater community integration, where we would stop meeting in the hospital and start meeting at the local game store. Eventually, that group kept going, but the therapist bowed out and like let the group become self-run and just a thing that occurs in the community.
I think those are great markers when we're thinking about like how does this work, right? Because we want to measure outcome in a couple of different ways, and we have some pilot data that says that this does work in some of our like more traditional ways of measuring outcomes. But it's also really important to look at kind of those markers in our lives when especially when we're working with a veteran population, any population anyway. We're concerned with social interaction because that is one of the biggest markers of kind of success and wellness and health across the board, is how much do you feel you are connected. It doesn't actually matter if you have friends, but it matters whether or not you think you have friends, you think you have these connections you can build on. And with a lot of our groups, but especially the group that I most recently ran, both in the primary care mental health integration as well as the mental health clinic, they started going to lunch together, and these were people who were incredibly isolated. They were really only coming to the VA for their appointments, and that was about it. They were going to jobs, or they were at home and they weren't working and they didn't have jobs, so they were incredibly isolated. So not only did this group start engaging kind of more organically in terms of going out to lunch after group, they also started an alumni group. So this was a group that they began running. It was not a therapeutic group because there were no therapists involved, but it was a social group. And instead of just keeping the alumni group open to the alumni of the group, they actually went ahead and decided to host it on a local base so that they were able to include both veterans as well as active duty service members. Several of them expressed the goal of they really wanted to be able to bridge that connect between active duty and veteran because that transition can be really, really challenging for a lot of people. And that group is still going. When COVID hit, they went online. This is not a group that was particularly interested in technology, and they will tell you that they're not interested in technology, but it was worth figuring out the technology to continue the group. And so I think those kinds of stories are a real testament to kind of how powerful of an intervention this can be.
So there's been lots of really great stories shared on our panel today. I'm curious if there is data. Is there research yet? If not, what's in the way of getting more research out there to help every veteran in need, every VA have a program like this?
So there is some pilot data. So I have some pilot data that has shown on an individual basis, which we generally do not like to run things on individual bases, but because of challenges in getting people to fill out forms at the appropriate times, I'm not going to make kind of larger statements that shows like decreases in symptoms on two common measures that we look at for screeners for depression and screeners for anxiety. So we're seeing improvement in symptoms there. I know that Allison is working on collecting more data as well. There are some other projects that we have in the work. The reality is that research can be slow. Research in large organizations like the VA has a lot of hoops for in time. A lot of those hoops are for good reasons to protect people, but we're working on it. It's happening.
Yeah. Yeah, we hope one day to be able to, Elizabeth and I were kind of, we're administering the same types of measures. So we're hoping one day to potentially do a little bit of like cross-site analyses, basically just so we have like a bigger pool of people to be able to run some data analyses on. But the group for me this upcoming year is actually a part of a more structured research project. And so like I'm basically like manualizing and protocoling most everything out, which I have a lot of like it's good. I think this is I'm really excited to get the research, but there's a part like the creative side of myself is like feeling a little restricted in certain capacities. But I think that's natural whenever you're going forward with research and making sure that it's rigorous. Is that there are going to be certain constraints. But we're trying to keep it as natural and organic of a program development type of project. So it's not like a randomized control anything. It's just we're going to see if this group, how it helps people. We're going to be running 3, maybe 4 different cohorts to hopefully be able to get, at least a larger pool of data and hopefully to one day be able to publish that. That is the ultimate goal. And I think particularly in terms of research right now with like tabletop gaming, there are phenomenal people out there who are really doing great work and trying to get more and more publications out there. There's a lot more, I think, within the digital gaming realm, but I think tabletop and those folks who are really dedicated to it are trying to get as much research out there across kind of the spectrum of journals.
Fantastic. We only have a couple of minutes left in our panel today, so I would love for you to offer the audience a takeaway, something that if you are just really wished you'd had the chance to say it so far, this is your chance. Also, let people know where they can find you if they want to learn more about your work, Twitter, newsletters, whatever your offers are. Go ahead and share that with everybody.
So my takeaway, I think, is if this is something that you're interested in as a veteran, you can talk to your providers. They can contact me or Allison, and we would be happy to talk about starting programs at your VA. If you are someone who's interested in becoming a facilitator, I feel you, right? There has not been a lot of formalized training. So Game to Grow, you'll notice I introduced myself as the Director of Education and Training. That is for a reason. Training is something that I'm incredibly passionate about. I want more people to do this work, and I want more people to do this work well and to have the support they need to run these groups effectively. And so we at Game to Grow are continuing to expand our training offerings, but specifically we have our comprehensive training program that is launching, tentative date October 3rd. So keep an eye out for that. Sign up for our newsletter. We will not spam you, but that's at gametogrow.org/newsletter. And you can find me and Jared on the interwebs on Twitter at Doctors Kilmer if you're trying to get in touch with the both of us.
Yeah, and you kind of, I just want to echo what you said, because that was my main issue as well, is it is hard for these groups to exist if the facilitators do not exist. And so if you are working with veterans, or really in any other system, and you think that this is an intervention that resonates with you and something that you would like to learn how to deliver, reach out to us for questions, consultations, scaffolding. How
we have a
can we
group
help
consultation
you
group.
get that set up?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Alice,
I
what
think
about you?
one, just on the facilitator and 100% echoing what Jared and Elizabeth have said of like, if this is something you're interested in, if this is something maybe you're kind of like on the fence but want to get more information about, please reach out. Because this is an area that is growing, it is novel, it is fascinating, and we need more people who are passionate and want to do this to be able to build momentum. Because my second takeaway is therapy can be fun. And I think that's one of the big things that comes from this is therapy isn't about laying on a couch and telling your deepest, darkest secrets. It can be fun and engaging and help in so many different ways that aren't just symptom reductions. It can lead to such a more fulfilling, meaningful life, and that there's a lot of ways to go about that. So for finding me, you can also find me on Twitter at Dr_battles. That will be where I'm at.
Awesome. Therapy should be fun is a great way to end our panel today. If you'd like to learn more about Game to Grow, like Elizabeth said, check out gametogrow.org. We have groups that you can join for wherever you are around the world, so check that out. And we'll see you next time.
Bye, everybody.